Okay, guys, this is Algebra 2, Module 2, Lesson 7, and this is, I think this is, well, in the book, it's like Problem 4, the end of Problem 4, but this is talking about secants and cofunctions, and I'm going to take off here because I think this is probably about where you started struggling, and I'm going to do a few of them. I'm not going to do the last 2 or 3. Like I said, those are kind of moving into the next lesson, so don't worry about if you can't understand those or get those. You should be able to go back and understand them and get them, but if you didn't understand it while you were doing the lesson, that's fine. All right, so let's look at this. This says that we want to find the following values from the information given. So all we're given is that the cosecant of theta, that's what we're looking for, okay? But we know that sine of theta is 0, okay? And that tells us a whole lot. Why? Well, because if we look at this, what is, first of all, we're going to have to say, what is cosecant? Well, that is the inverse of sine, right? So that's 1 over sine of theta. Well, what is sine? It is 0. So that would equal 1 over 0. But we know that to be what? You can't have 0 in the denominator, so that's considered undefined. Okay? You can't do that. Okay? So that's it for that one. Now, if you go to cotangent and F, what is that? Well, that is the inverse of tangent, and tangent is opposite over adjacent, so cotangent is equal to 1 over tangent. Okay, and we know that tangent, it gives us tangent. Tangent is 1 over a negative 0.0005. Okay. Now, that's the same thing as saying 1, what is that? That's tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. So that's the same thing as saying negative 5 divided by 10,000. Okay. Okay. Now, that's going to tell us that we can basically flip those now, and we have a negative 10,000 over 5, and that is equal to a negative 2,000. Okay? Now, this next problem is just basically wanting you to, oh no, I was thinking this was explaining this a different one. Okay, so this one says choose 3 theta values from the table in problem 1 for which the secant, cosecant, and tangent are not defined. I'm sorry, they are defined and not zeros. Okay, so they are defined, but they're not zeros. Show that for these values of theta, the secant of theta divided by the cosecant of theta is equal to tangent. Oh, wow. Okay. So let's first look at, we'll take theta of 30 is equal to 30 degrees, theta of 60, and we'll just go in between that and say theta of 45. Okay? Now, let's think about this. If we have the tangent here, what is the tangent equal? Well, here it's going to be square root of 3 over 3 will be our tangent of 30. So secant of theta over cosecant will equal, let's see here, the secant will be the cosine inverse. So the cosine inverse would have been, if I had the chart, let me see here, let me look at the chart. Okay, the secant is 2 square roots of 3 over 2. You should be able to get this from your chart. And then divided by 2. Well, if that's going to be the case, oh wait, I wrote that down wrong. 2 square roots of 3 over 3. Okay, well then that's easy because that's going to get rid of that and it's going to get rid of that. So that's going to be the square root of 3 over 3, which is our tangent. There you go. Okay, that was simple. All right, let's look at 60 degree. So that is going to have a tangent of tangent of 60 is equal to square root of 3. Let me rewrite that. And this is all just coming from your chart. Okay. Tangent of square root of 3. Now, we want to, same thing, we want to see how secant of theta is equal to our tangent. Well, what is the secant of 60 degrees? 60 degrees secant is 2. The cosecant from our chart tells us that it's 2 square roots of 3 over 3. Okay, let me make sure that's correct. Yes. So now then, we can say that is that correct? Yeah, we get rid of that, which leaves us the square root of 3 over 3. Oh, no, it doesn't. Since this is a fraction down here, we would flip it. So it's the square root of 3 over 3, or 3 divided by the square root of 3. If we rationalize that, it's going to be 3 square roots of 3 over 3, and that's going to get rid of it, and so that will equal the square root of 3. And that is our tangent. Okay? So, and the reason why, maybe I need to show y'all this. Let me do it in a different color here. This would be 1 over the square root of 3 over 3. And so you would flip that. Okay? If I can find that same green color. Probably not. Okay. Now let's look at 45. So if we're looking at 45. If I'm looking at my chart, I have the tangent, cotangent's 1. Well, okay, cotangent's 1, then the tangent is also equal to 1. A little off on my greens there. Okay. So if the tangent is 1, what is our secant and cosecant? For 45, our secant is the square root of 2 over, square root of 2, you know that. Okay. Well, that's easy. I mean, there you go. Right? Square root of 2 over square root of 2 is equal to 1. And that was our tangent. This is our secant and cosecant there. Okay. Let's go to page 2. And this says find the value of secant and cosine, oh no, for the values of theta. Okay. So we have the theta is equal to, sorry, this is not the sec, we're not finding, well, we are finding the secant of theta and the cosine of theta, but we're multiplying those together. Okay. Oh, this is silly. Okay. Well, what is the secant of 120? If you go back and look at your chart there, you've already got it written down. So you would have the secant of 120. Let me find it again. The secant is -2. Okay, so let me do this. Let's go with secant, cosine, and I'm just going to kind of make a little chart here for all of these. Okay, so now we have -2. Well, I know that the inverse of that is going to be a -1/2. Well, what is -2 times a -1? That's going to equal 1. I'm sorry, -2 times a -1/2 is equal to a +1. And the reason why I said this is silly is because you'll see after this next problem. Well, 225, the secant is -2, or negative square root of 2, and the cosine then would be 1 over negative square root of 2, which when you multiply those together would give you 1. Now, if we go back to it, we would go with, oh wait, I did a cosecant, didn't I? No, I didn't. I didn't secant. Okay. So what about for 330? Well, 330, the secant is 2 square roots of 3 over 3. So if I was to flip that, I would have 3 over 2 square roots of 3. Okay. And if you were to multiply straight across, that would equal the same thing on top as it does on bottom. So that would be like saying 6 square roots of 3 over 6 square roots of 3. Well, that's equal to 1. See why I said that's kind of silly, kind of weird the way they did that? Okay. So D says explain the reasons for the patterns that you see in this problem. Okay. Well, it says simply what I would say is cosine, first of all, as long as it is not 0, this is kind of one of those extraneous solutions, then we know that secant is equal to 1 over cosine of theta. And that's the reason why cosine of theta can't be 0, right? Well, if you multiply secant times 1 over, nope. If you multiply secant times cosine, then what you're going to end up with is 1 over the cosine, because that's what secant is, times cosine. Well, what is that? That's cosine over cosine, which is equal to 1. If you multiply that straight across, you get cosine over cosine, which is equal to 1. All right. Page 3 says, draw a diagram representing two values of theta between 0 and 360 so that the sine of theta is equal to a negative square root of 3 over 2. Find the values of tangent, secant, cosecant for each value of theta. Okay. Well, first thing we're going to say is, what do we know? Well, I know right now that if the sine is going to be a negative, that it's going to have to be in the bottom two quadrants. We're going to have to be in quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. So I'm going to draw my graph here. Okay. Act like that is a great graph. Now, when is sine a negative, or when is sine the square root of 3 over 2? We know it's negative. Well, that's when the sine is 60, right? So let me change colors here. Act like those are the same, which is a reference angle of 60 degrees. Okay. So now we've drawn the diagram. Find the values of the tangent, of the secant, and of the cosecant. So let's start with tangent. What is the... So let's go ahead and label this too. If that is a 60-degree angle, then that is a 240 degree, and this would be 300 degrees. So what we would say here, what is the tangent? Okay, let's draw it. And let's go with a dark purple here. Okay, this is going to be a sine of square root of 3 over 2. This is going to be 1/2. It's going to be the same thing on both of them, right? This will be 1/2. This will be square root of 3 over 2. These are negative. Okay. So we have a tangent of 240 degrees. Well, that is opposite over adjacent, and that would be the square root of 3 over 2 over 1/2. Opposite over adjacent. Well, how do we divide by a fraction? We flip and multiply, which gives you, if you were to do that, hopefully you know that if we take a half and multiply it by 2, that is 1. So our answer is going to be the square root of 3 is all that's left. Okay, so that's our tangent. Now let's look at, let's do secant. Well, the secant is the inverse of 1 over the cosine. So what is the cosine here? Cosine is 1/2. So 1 divided by, well, I'm sorry, this one is a negative 1/2 because we're still talking about 240 here, secant of 240. Okay, that's a negative 1/2. Well, what is 1 divided by a negative 1/2? Well, that's just simply negative 2, right? Flip multiply. Now let's look at, what are we looking at here? Cosecant, okay, of 240. Well, that we know that that is equal to 1 over the sine, and the sine is a negative square root of 3 over 2. We were told that in the problem. We don't have to look at that. So if we were to flip and multiply that, we would have 2 over a negative square root of 3. Well, I mean, that negative doesn't necessarily have to be in the denominator, but okay. We don't like that, so we're going to multiply by the square root of 3. And we would get 2 square roots of 3 over 3. Negative? Yep, negative. Hold on, guys. Yeah, yep, that's negative. Okay, yep, there's your answers for those. Now you do the same thing for 30, right? The only difference is going to be your sines. Okay, you're still going to have a tangent of, was it 300? You're still going to have the same numbers. The only thing it's going to be is it's going to change the sign because you're in a different quadrant here. So it's going to be a negative square root of 3. And your secant would be 240. If you don't trust me on that, work these out. Oh, I don't know what I'm doing there. And see. Okay, and for 240 it was 2, or negative 2, so this one's going to be a positive 2. Now, for cosecant of 300, that one will not. That one will stay the same because the sign is the same. Sine is still a negative square root of 3 over 2, so that one's going to stay the same. These change because you're talking about the cosines, which changes the sign. But since cosecant is only talking about your sine, it will remain the exact same. All right, let's do, I think, one more. Okay, it says find the value of secant of theta squared minus the tangent of theta squared. And when this theta is equal to 225. Okay. So when the degrees for 200, the secant of, let's just rewrite that. I don't know why they didn't just put that in there. But the secant of 225 squared minus the tangent of 225 squared. Let me put all that in parentheses because we'll have to find the secant then squared. Okay. So what is the secant of 225? Well, let's just draw us a little graph here. And 225 is going to be right here. That's a 45-degree angle. And I know that the square root of 2 over 2, and that will be a so since we're talking about cosine, this is a cosine of 225 is equal to a negative square root of 2 over 2. And if I was to flip that for the inverse, let me show you what happens here. If I flip it to do the inverse, that becomes 2, negative 2 over the square root of 2. So I would multiply both of those together. And that would be 2 square roots of 2 over 2, which gets rid of each other. And so you're just going to have a negative square root of 2. Okay? So we're going to have. Now then, what is the tangent here? Well, it's cosine over sine. And we know that both for a 45-degree angle, it's the same thing. So this is going to be a negative 1. Okay, so let me get rid of this so I can write the rest of this over here. So now we have square root of 2, negative square root of 2 squared minus opposite over adjacent, which is the same thing as minus 1. Okay, so what is that? Well, what's the negative square root of 2 squared? Well, that's just going to end up getting rid of our negative, getting rid of our square root, and leaving us with 2 minus 1, and that's going to equal 1. Okay. I bet you something like that's going to have to work out for this one too. So we have the cosecant minus the cotangent, okay, of 300. So first I got to find out what is the sine of 300 and what is the, actually I don't want to do that because that's not correct. Well, let me just find what is the sine of 300. Well, 300 once again is down here. And this, and it's 60, I know it's a 60-degree angle. Well, what's the sine of a 60-degree angle? That would be square root of 3 over 2, negative. Okay, so we have a negative square root of 3 over 2 squared minus, what is the cotangent? Well, if I plotted this point here, this would be if the sine is a negative square root of 3 over 2, and the cosine is 1/2. And I know actually it's yeah, that's right. So tangent is opposite over adjacent. So the cotangent is going to be the adjacent over the opposite. And the opposite is the sine here. So that's going to be minus square root of 3 over 2. And this would be 1/2. Now, let's keep going here. If I'm going to move back to this one over here. if we were to square that, we should get oh, I gotta watch out because this was the sine. So I need the cosine. So I've got to flip that. So that's going to be 2 over negative square root 3 square root of 2 over negative square root of 3 squared. So that's going to be 4 over 3 minus, oh, and all of this is squared too. Okay, well, we got to work inside the parentheses first. So that's going to give us, if we were to flip that, well, first of all, I just now realized that I have done the wrong number. It's 330, not 300, but I'm just going to keep going. Okay, let's just keep going. Let me just mark that out. Sorry, let's do 300. Sorry about that. And if we keep going, we're just going to change this up completely, but that's okay. What would have happened, you would have ended up with another 1 because whenever you subtract the cotangent from the cosecant of the same angle squared, that's going to give you the 1 of the unit circle, but don't worry about that. Let's just keep doing this. This is good for practice. Okay, so to divide by a fraction, we would flip it and multiply. So if we did that, that would become 1/2 times 2 over the square root of 3, which is 2 over 2 square roots of 3, which is the same thing as saying 1/3 or 1 over the square root of 3, which is the same thing as saying 1 over square root of 3 multiplied by the square root of 3, and that gives you square root of 3 over 3. Okay, so let's mark all that out. And that would leave you with, I'm probably just going to leave that at, oh, we got to square it. We haven't squared this one yet. So that's going to be 4 over 3 minus 3 over 9, which would equal what? Well, this becomes 9, this becomes an 8, 5/9. Okay, I think I did that right. It kind of messed me up. But that should be correct. Okay, now let's go back and do, I think that was it. If that's it, I'll go back and redo this one. Yeah. All right, let me go back and redo this one with the correct numbers now. Let's do it with 330. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and draw my graph over here again. 330 would be a 30-degree angle, which makes this the square root of 3 over 2. And this right here is 1/2 negative. Okay, so the sine is negative 1/2. So the cosecant would be -2. Okay, let me write that out because we're looking at the sine. And if it is equal, the sine of 330 is equal to a -1/2. That means that the cosecant of 330 is equal to a -2 because we just flip it. All right. And we know that cotangent is equal to adjacent over opposite. Well, adjacent is square root of 3 over 2, and the opposite would be a negative 1/2. So if we were to keep change, flip, we would get that would be 2 square roots of 3. Let me just do it. 2 square roots of 3 over 2, negative, which get rid of that, and it's a negative square root of 3. Okay, so cotangent is equal to square root of 3. Let me rewrite this. 330 is equal to the square root, negative square root of 3. So now then we've got everything that we can do to plug in our formula. Negative 2 squared minus a negative square root of 3 squared. Is that a negative square root of 3? Which it doesn't matter. Okay, so this is going to be 4 minus 3, which is equal to 1. See, told you it would work out to be this 1. That was much easier than what I tried doing earlier. Sorry about that. All right, so that should help you out with some formulas there.